Let me, on the onset, join my colleagues and thank the Lord for his blessings. Thank my cabinet for their friendship and their support. To thank my family for their support. But even more importantly, I want to again reiterate my gratitude and how humbled I am by the people of Micoud South for their support in the last elections. But even more importantly, Madam Speaker, that every time I go down there, the level of love and respect that they show me and the continued prayers that I know many of them continue to provide me and my family. And I just want to say how incredibly grateful I am to them. And that I made a promise to them, of which I work every single day to endeavor to be able to fulfill. And I want to thank the Minister of Infrastructure, who was able to get the Duga Road commenced. I believe that they've commenced this week on fixing up the Duga Road all the way to Lacouville. And I just want to say that I made a promise that the first road that we would have done when we came into government would be that road. And I want to share and empathize with many of the other MPs whose conditions of the roads are in those deplorable conditions. And we know the impact it has on the daily lives of our constituents. And I'm no different than you are. But I am so grateful that I was able to provide that. And I want to again thank you, Minister King, for your support in making that happen. Madam Speaker, I'm going to try as best as possible to be able to answer many of the questions that came up in today's debate. But before I begin, I just want to say that we're all part of a network, of a fraternity, of people who are making incredible sacrifices every day for our country. And while we may at times differ on our ideas, but we all have one thing in common. And I recognize that and appreciate that from both sides, is our passion for our country. And that all of you have made the most incredible sacrifice in putting yourselves through what we go through. You know, Minister Baptist made a lot of very good points in terms of when he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and how we tackle each other. I think they were all stronger for it at the end of the day. I also suffer sometimes of thinking that people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we're compelled to continue to try to stay in the forefront to educate people, to inform people as to what we're doing. But I felt it would be very important, Madam Speaker, to say to all of us who are participating in Parliament, including the staff, how much I appreciate what you're doing and recognize the sacrifices you're making. And more importantly, I want to say to all your loved ones and your family how grateful we all are for the support that you give all of us. So on that note, Madam Speaker, maybe if I can start with the last speaker, the Honourable Member from Laborie, who, when he made his comments that it would be over his dead body that I would be here, I always took it in jest, but always made sure that when I went to Laborie, or what do we call it? The Republic of Laborie, that I made sure I called them, just in case. He made a very important observation, and it's one I think that I should expound upon. He talked about the DSH project and the fact that government has leased land for the DSH project, which is true. Government has leased just over, I think it's going to be 300 acres maybe, that we're going to be leasing. And the land that we're using for the lease is specifically for the horse racing track, of which the investor is putting his own money into the horse racing track. And that once the horse racing track is up and running, that he'll bring his own money to the table to be able to employ, I'm hoping, close to over 1,000 young persons, both men and women, who can now get into this new industry for St. Lucia. In addition to the horse racing, there is the caring of the animals, because he intends to actually bring thoroughbreds from around the world before they are transshipped to other parts of the world. And that it's going to take at least 3 young people to be able to take care of each of those animals. We're also talking about running a lottery, in which that lottery, every single week there'll be a horse race. And it's going to be aired over TV. So it means the whole broadcasting of that is going to be of St. Lucians doing it. So again, that's more employment that it's generating. But what's interesting about the DSH project, Madam Speaker, is that from the onset, we made it public. From the get-go. The first meeting I had with Mr. Tea King, there was a picture on my Facebook site indicating that I had met him. We then had a series of internal meetings, and once we had decided that we wanted to proceed to develop that project, we signed an MOU, a framework agreement. And that framework agreement was signed in cabinet amongst all my cabinet colleagues, and we had all of the media there. Transparent for everybody to see. So the fact that we are having a discussion about DSH is in fact the education and the participation of the public. Because the plans of the DSH project have been made public. All of them. Even ones that have not been finally developed. But the thought process, everybody is able to participate in that process. That is remarkably different to a project that's taking place in Black Bay. So again, whether it's by convention or not, and that the Prime Minister was given the authority to speak on behalf of Cabinet, that an agreement was signed on June 2nd, remembering that elections was on June 6th. And that agreement was with a company called Range, to allow them to purchase over 300 acres of land at Black Bay. And the selling price was $3 EC a square foot. I bring that up because I have friends who are trying to buy land in Opicon. And I think they're trying to sell them the land for like $15 a square foot. So to say that $3 a square foot is a deal for beachfront land, I would say it's a deal. When were we informed of this agreement? Where was the press conference to announce that we have this big deal and explain the details of what that deal was and what it's going to entail for St. Lucians? And furthermore, that project then was approved under the CIP even before it had planning approval. But one of the requisites to be an approved CIP project is exactly that, DCA approval. The project in Sabasha, same thing. When was the community involved? Who knew about it? And then when the minister now had, and the representative for Choiseul had to go and meet with the community to explain to them that in selling the land and agreeing to build the hotel, that the road that they were accustomed to going through could no longer be the road they were going to use. It wasn't the people who signed the agreement that did that, but in their haste to make this thing happen, all these things went out the window. The member from Labrie also gave a strange story about Air France, an interesting story, and made the observation that somehow we inherited a plane that was in stable air, and that things, huh? Yeah, there was no turbulence.
Oh, okay.
Okay, everything was good. All we had to do was just keep guiding the plane because it was already heading in the right direction. But in fact, that when his political leader inherited the government, somehow everything was turbulent. You know, Madam Speaker, in the first 3 years that they came into government, they ran an overall deficit of $227 million in $328 million in 2012, followed by $216 million in 2013, and $144 million in 2014. So in the first 3 years, they ran an overall deficit of $700 million. And I'm going to bring up a point that the Leader of the Opposition doesn't like to hear. His favorite thing, which is the sinking fund, that we also had left a sinking fund of $200 million. Remember? Mm-hmm. And despite how bad things were, the then Prime Minister and Minister of Finance never, ever drew down on that money. In fact, there were members in cabinet that begged him that after Hurricane Thomas, begged him to spend that $200 million in the economy right away. And he said no. But the Labour Party, it did not take them 2 years and spent it all. So that is what we call free capital. Free capital is money that was in the bank account that had no attachments to it. It was just cash in a savings account for the people of St. Lucia. So in addition to the $700 million, they spent another $200 million. So the $100 million that the Prime Minister promised to spend, in fact, he did spend it. But what's interesting to note is that the growth rate for those years, and I don't know which one you want to go by, the new one or the old one, but let's just take the old rate, declined by minus 1.2% the first year, declined by minus 2.10% in the second year, and declined by 0.7% in the third year. So after spending all that money, it didn't generate any growth. So it now leads me, Madam Speaker, to talk about where we are. But before I get there, I just want to also address one other thing that the member from Labrie brought up. And some of the other members brought it up as well. That the reduction of 2.5% in VAT shouldn't have been done, could have earned more money, it's made no impact on the people of St. Lucia. It's close to $40 million, maybe even $50 million of revenue that the government has foregone. That money doesn't disappear. So the money either becomes profit in the businesses, in which now the businesses start feeling better about doing business, and are now going to invest more money back into St. Lucia, or pay higher corporate taxes. So that people who have not felt it at the grocery stores, I know some people who have. But what about when you are renting space and the VAT went down by the 2.5%? What happens when you're buying a car? What happens when you're buying services? What happens when you're buying building materials for your home? What happens when you're getting supplies? What happens when you buy furniture or clothing? Every day, that 2.5%, everybody feels it. And that 2.5% is not going to be the solution to everybody's problem. But that 2.5% is an indication of the direction of the government, that it's going to reduce taxes and it's going to focus on growing our economy, which in itself instills confidence. And the former Prime Minister put it best because he gave an incredible speech tonight. Very revealing. Well, the short man in the group was really him. But that's for another day. The story here is that for 4 years, the SLP government was having difficulty in raising bonds. I think the member from Castries Southeast alluded to that. And in not being able to raise bonds is because of confidence. People just didn't have confidence. So they were not prepared to take long-term risk on the economy. So instead, they wanted short-term risk. But you know what's a funny thing? When we got into government, this year, we were able to get more bonds than we've been able to get for the last 5 years. And you know why? Confidence is now starting to turn around in this country. So let me say this. The leader of the opposition has stated that the SLP administration has a good record of fiscal management, and he attempted to demonstrate this by looking at the record of the SLP government for the financial year 2016-2017. Madam Speaker, as a student of economics, the honourable member would know that one cannot measure the performance of an economy by analyzing 1 year. The leader of the opposition would know that the performance of the SLP should be measured by their performance over the period they were in office. The more relevant analysis is therefore contained in their report card for the period 2012 to 2016. The analysis gets even more interesting when we compare this record with the period of the United Workers' Party government was in office, and that period was 2006 to 2011. As the leader of the opposition stated repeatedly, and I love this, I say this all the time, I'm accused of it, numbers do not lie. Men are tended to exaggerate, but numbers don't lie. Madam Speaker, I believe the numbers tell the story that we all need to know and understand. It is important to place the two periods, that a period of 2006 to 2011 when the UW government was in office against the 2012-2016 period, the period in which the Labour government was in office. It's important to put these two periods in context, and I will present the context to you. First of all, in 2007 to 2011, we had the construction for the Cricket World Cup 2007. And after all the hype, ended up becoming a complete disaster. In fact, St. Lucia spent almost $85 million on hosting World Cup cricket. And we had a stadium already. But we've never really had a thorough investigation as to where that $85 million went. But I do remember who the CEO of World Cup cricket St. Lucia for 2007 was. We had the global financial crisis in 2007 and 2008. Singularly, the worst financial disaster in our lifetimes. And in fact, has been compared with the depression that took place in 1930. We had historically high oil prices in excess of $140 a barrel. Rice, flour, and sugar were at record levels. In fact, India stopped exporting rice because the price of rice became so expensive. We had the passage of Hurricane Thomas, which I think still goes down as one of the largest disasters that we've had. We had the passage of the Christmas Eve trough in 2013, and we had the drought in 2010. And just to put all of this in context, right after the recession in the US, the Dow Jones dropped from 15,000 to 7,000. And unemployment in the United States rose to 10%. Now let's compare that to 2012 and 2016. Significant reductions in the price of oil. In fact, price of oil dropped for a period of time well below $50. We had the introduction of VAT in 2012, and the former minister, and now representative from Cass-Free Southeast, talked about how much incremental revenue that VAT generated when the government came into office. We had drought conditions in 2013. The US Dow Jones surpassed 17,000 and right now is at 20,000. And unemployment in the United States of America has dropped below 5%. And I use the United States of America because it is a critical market for our tourism. How did we fare compared to the rest of the OECS countries? During the 2007-2011 period, the OECS, during the 2012-2016 period, the OECS growth was an average of 2.2%. And St. Lucia was 0.9. In fact, St. Lucia is the lowest. The lowest. We had an IMF program in St. Lucia? And so that's why they grew more? And that's why they grew more? The structural adjustment period, where they had to contract, they grew more. So it's even worse yet, Minister. Yes. You're going to tell me that people under a structural adjustment period were growing by more? But what's amazing is in the 2007 to 2011 period, St. Lucia was number one. In fact, in that same period, St. Lucia took over as the largest economy in the OECS. On the United Workers' Party. In 2010, where every single other country in the Caribbean was declining in tourism arrivals, St. Lucia grew by 10%. By 10%. Tourism arrivals. Go and check it. Overall. Go and check it. The social and economic review is right there. And if we look at the growth rate, the average growth rate of St. Lucia during that period, when we had all these crises, was 2%. And the debt that we accumulated was nearly half the amount of the former government. So, the average growth rate for 2007 to 2011 was 1.98% compared to 0.3% for the SLP for 2012 to 2016. Madam Speaker, this performance of the United Workers' Party is even more impressive when one considers the context in which this performance took place. It is to be noted that there was only 1 year of negative growth in 2007 to 2011, which was minus 0.8% compared to 2012 to 2016, where growth was flat low. There was 2 years of negative growth, otherwise low growth. The only year of growth was in 2015, where a moderate growth of 2% was recorded. Unemployment, and this is a number that keeps being fluctuated all over the place. Increases in unemployment rate in 2007 to 2011. This was the period during which the country was affected by the global financial crisis and the severe droughts and the passage of Hurricane Thomas. The highest unemployment rate in 2007 to 2011 was 21.2%, compared to a height of 24.4% in 2012 to 2016. And the unemployment rate was able to be contained during 2007 to 2000, was not allowed to surpass 21.2%. But you know, the former Minister of Finance still gets it wrong. Because he talked about that in this year's review, and he's 100% right, unemployment overall fell by 21.4%. But what's interesting is that youth unemployment still remained at 44%. In the current revenue and current expenditure, Madam Speaker, the public finances were managed a lot better during the period in office, namely 2007 to 2011, compared to 2012-2016. There was a positive current account balance every year for 2007 to 2011, compared to 2012-2016, where the current balances were significantly lower and in negative for the 2 years. There was 1 year where the current balance was as much as 52.8 million in 2012, negative. Madam Speaker, the average current balance in 2007 to 2011 was 98 million, compared to 29 million for 2012 to 2016. Significantly higher average current expenditure in 2012 to 2016 of 894 million, compared to 687 million in 2007 and 2011. So spending more money, but it was generating less growth. I wish to underscore, Madam Speaker, that the SLP government recorded a huge deficit, as I said, of minus 328 million in 2012, compared to the largest deficit in the period of 227. And here comes the most interesting thing, because we continue to debate this. Debt. During the period of 2007 to 2016, the public debt increased by 1.2 billion from 2007 to 2016. Let us now see who contributed most to the increase in the debt. In the period 2007 to 2011, Madam Speaker, the public debt increased by $519 million. And in 2007 to 2011, compared to $715 million for the period 2011-2016. Should I repeat these numbers for the benefit of the honourable members? I also wish to inform the honourable members, Speaker, that there was less borrowing in 2007 and 2011, a period which was much more challenging. I will now examine the debt to GDP ratio, the measure international agencies use to measure how well countries manage their debt. Madam Speaker, the debt to GDP ratio increased by just 3.7% from 2007 to 2011, compared to an increase of 11.8% from 2012 to 2016. We're talking about contraction, stabilizing the country. I don't know what we're talking about. The numbers don't lie. Madam Speaker, it is clear from the records for the two periods the UP administration managed the economy and finances and public debt much better than the SLP government. And Madam Speaker, the truth is that the record of the last administration would have been far worse, but the SLP government was constrained due to the fact they could not inspire confidence in this economy and could not raise the financing to finance expenditures. And that's a fact. If they had been able to borrow more money, they would have. But they couldn't. And even with the brakes on them, they still found ways to borrow the money. Madam Speaker, I've explained in my opening statement the projections for the budget, as a leader of opposition would know, is the result of existing policies of previous years during the period on which SLP government was in office, and some new policies to be presented in the next sitting of Parliament. I already explained the reasons for these increases in expenditure in my presentation when I presented the estimates of expenditure. I will repeat the reasons for the benefit of the honourable members and Madam Speaker. Wages and salaries have been explained by increases in pensions. So the 2.2% increase, or the $13 million that the former Prime Minister and Minister of Finance talked about increases in wages, 80% of that is in the form of pensions. Increase in the provision for CARICRIS as an existing policy. We've decided, given the number of storms and the fact it's so difficult to get cash, that we've decided to put more money into the insurance premium, that if by, knock on wood, it doesn't happen, but if by chance it does, that we will be able to access even more money than we did last time. The Tourist Board payables of $10 million, of which we've agreed to try to pay off $5 million this year. The Festivals Commission, which includes the reclassification of expenditure for jazz and other festivals from capital to recurrent expenditure. So this is going to be an annual thing. Jazz and events are annual things. and they should be classified as being recurrent expenditure. We have done that. Not fooling the people. The rental of office space for the Financial Administrative Center. The building is built. We now have to start paying. That's increased the amount we have to pay. The medical supplies and existing policies. So we owed money on the regional market for what we were doing. We'd not been paying, and St. Lucia was behind, and it was impacting the ability of that agency to go out and buy more medicine. We had to put that money up. Operating and maintenance for the roads last year was $5 million, but you know that, which was woefully inadequate, and this time we aim to correct this with a provision of $14 million. What was brought up during the debate was the distress fund. The Leader of the Opposition stated that he saw no allocation for the distress fund in the 2017-2018 estimates. I wish to inform the Honourable Member, Madam Speaker, that the expenses related to the distress events are unanticipated expenses. Accordingly, they are appropriately classified and will be considered as a contingency and paid from that allocation. So they are there. Foregone revenue for the reduction in VAT from 15 to 22.5% to 12.5%. Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition indicated that the airport development tax introduced will replace the revenue foregone from the VAT reduction. This is incorrect. There are two separate policies and should be considered as such. The airport development tax is to be used primarily for the redevelopment of the HIA, and the reduction in VAT was intended to reduce the price of goods for our people and stimulate economic activity. On assuming office, my government undertook a diagnostic of this economy undertaken by the CDB, and it is in a customary manner the IMF Article 4 consultations both were consistent with the comments on tax policy in St. Lucia. And we talk about not providing all the facts. When you read from a document, it's always good if you can read it all the way to the end, because sometimes you leave out the most important thing. So the member from Castries East read from the CDB report, but what he forgot to do was to continue where it says the tax rates are relatively high and the tax burden is high despite exemptions particularly on trade. This is when compared on taxes in small states and emerging markets. St. Lucia's rate of tax collection as a percentage of GDP is the highest in the OECS and is among the highest of all small states. The report says that. Oh, absolutely, the report says that. I've stated before that in respect of the VAT, the objective of reducing the VAT was to spur economic growth and to reduce the tax burden. The Leader of the Opposition, in his review of the performance of the VAT, noted the following. He talked about the VAT that we collected in 2016 and 2017, which was $336 million, compared to 2017, which we are projecting at 302, and a VAT rate of 15% and 12.5%. And he said that the equivalent of 1% of VAT in 2016, 2017 was 22 million. And I'm just rounding it off if you don't mind, Leader of the Opposition. And 2017, 2018 was 24. And he was saying that that was impossible. Well, the simplified analysis presented by him is not correct. I wish to remind the Leader of the Opposition there are two rates of the VAT, tourism sector at 10% and the general VAT rate of 15%. Accordingly, the calculation is erroneous. In addition, this simplistic analysis assumes that the economy did not grow between the two periods. And this is patently false, Madam Speaker. Debt burden. The Leader of the Opposition spoke of the debt burden, Madam Speaker. The debt burden will only increase if growth is not realized. Read it. This is why we intend to introduce tax and structural reforms aimed at spurring growth. In addition, my government intends to tackle the debt situation head-on, and I will elaborate on the government's policy thrust in my budget address. And I will talk about it at the end. The CIP performance. The Leader of the Opposition indicated that the performance of the CIP is a consequence of actions of our administration. This is incorrect. St. Lucia was a late entrant to the market, had a high price, was overly bureaucratic, and unfortunately put the wrong person to be the chairperson of the CIP. And we warned them. And one of the things he went and did is he gave exclusivities to companies in regions of which people don't want to do that. How can you have an entity that you give an exclusivity that gets 10% commission, regardless of whether they produce the lead or not? Not going to work. And then when you look at the fact that we were not putting money into it, that's what you end up with. Expenditure for the press secretary. A query was raised as to why the press secretary expenditure was zeroed. I have to go back to Minister Joseph. This is consistent with the prior year expenditure classification, Madam Speaker. Given that this is a political appointment, expenditure for this position has been reclassified under the professional and consultancy vote, appropriately done so by yourselves. And we agree. The Caribbean Development Bank policy-based loan was approved in 2009. 7 years after the loan was approved, the final disbursement has not been made. One of the conditions for the disbursement is the introduction of the Public Finance Management Bill, and not the procurement policy as indicated by the Leader of the Opposition. My government is in advanced stage of bringing this bill to Parliament. So it answers the other question which we'll be fulfilling in our manifesto, that we intend to be a highly regulated government, and we intend to put very well thought out benchmarks for ourselves in terms of running this economy. The Leader of the Opposition's favorite thing, the sinking fund. The Leader of the Opposition argues that it doesn't make economic sense to have a sinking fund. Permit me to share a review of St. Lucia's debt portfolio. It'll be noted that the current portfolio presents significant rollover risk, which any responsible government must seek to mitigate. Herein lies the obligation to have a sinking fund. Let me put numbers to that. When we went through the budget process this year, and we came to the end of the budget process, and it was presented to us, a group of us, that we were going to have to roll over $800 million in bonds and T-bills this year. $800 million. Rolling them over means that bonds and T-bills that become mature, but you're asking people to roll those over again. And because there is no sinking fund, that if any of those bondholders decide not to roll over that amount, the money comes from our cash flow. Because you have an obligation to pay it, because if you don't pay it, it will be the same thing as defaulting. So how can you be dealing with billions of dollars in debt and not have a little reserve there that in case something happens that you can quickly get some cash, unencumbered cash, to be able to pay for it? But no, don't have a sinking fund. Don't practice any fiscal prudence. Just fly in the wind. Maybe I have to use the example of my colleague from Lavery. No, I think there was plenty of turbulence. That's why it said stalling, 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 but y'all weren't listening. And again, I applaud the minister when he talks about let's not try to be overly political. Madam Speaker, the professional consultancy represents less than 1% of the estimates of the expenditure. Procurement of professional consultants, the procurement of professional consultants services is not uncommon for a new government on assuming office. To get an independent assessment of the state and the economy, to seek advice on the reforms a government wishes to implement. Much has been said about Ernst & Young, a company of international and regional repute in financial services. Madam Speaker, the agenda for budget reform is well known, and this is not the first time that an administration has drawn on professional consultancy services to provide supporting and advancing their agenda. This year, the Department of Finance focused on training 13 agencies of government in strengthening linkages between budgeting and results. What we found when we came in is there's no accountability. People did not know how to determine priorities. And I kept on saying, what's the point of having a list of projects with some money underneath it? And if you do the analysis that money is inadequate to be able to deliver what you wanted to deliver. And then if you look at man hours in terms of how many man hours you have available for that project, it's grossly inadequate. Isn't it not better to say, let us not do that project, take those resources and put it into a project which may have a better chance in delivering? That's what we have to do. Because we do not, everybody's admitted it. There's no argument. There is not enough revenue to cover the expenses that we have. And it gets even worse if you start establishing some benchmark numbers for yourself in terms of what is going to be the quality of services that you're going to deliver to the citizens of your country. Are we prepared to accept the quality of healthcare that we have today? Are we prepared to accept the quality of education that we have? Are we prepared to accept the quality of security that we have in our country? Are we prepared to accept the conditions of our roads? Minister said it. Are we prepared to accept that we should be doing more in foreign relations than we are currently? But we don't have enough money. But yet we've got programs all over the place. We're borrowing money. There's no big picture as to how much money we're borrowing. When I came in, I found out that we were going to borrow $100 million US from CDB. All kinds of projects. And I asked myself, are any of those projects going to move the needle? Because that represented a 10% increase in our debt. And even though the funds are concessionary, it's still debt. But you have to measure every single dollar and ask, is that the best way to spend the dollar right now? And you know what must motivate you in making those decisions? Because it's what motivates me every day. Is the inequality of the standard of living in this country. It is the mediocrity of the services that we provide. And the sense of hopelessness that people are living in this country. And particularly young people. And who's to blame? We are. Not this side, not that side. We are. That's what has to change. We talked about the police. You didn't see any increase in the police. Well, here's a great example of what we're doing. We're creating a border control in which the policemen, 75 of them that are currently employed at the airports, are going to be relieved and going to come back into.
Honorable Prime Minister, you now have 15 minutes within which to complete your presentation.
Hang on. So why didn't you do it? The leader of the opposition is saying that's not a new plan. So if it's not a new plan, where was the sense of urgency? Where was the sense of urgency? You see crime increasing. Doesn't it make sense to relieve those policemen who are doing what? Stamping papers? Absolutely unnecessary. Trained policemen sitting there doing something that's already done. We have an advanced passenger information service system. Where is the urgency? That's all I'm asking. So when you talk about that the Prime Minister is acting like a businessman and he thinks it's a business, well, that's how you act in business. It's not about profit. It's about process. So guess what? Acting like a politician, this is what you get. You get debt up to the kazoo. Means you have absolutely no discretionary income. And when people need help, but guess what? Help for you is that somebody burnt their house down. or somebody had an accident and you got to go and help them on an individual basis. That's the mendicant mentality that we must get out of. Let's get a bigger solution. Let's make sure that those people own their house, have a job in which they can afford to have insurance, so when something goes wrong, they can take care of themselves. That's what we're talking about. That's the fundamental difference of what we're doing. Madam Speaker, I don't want to belabor the point that was brought up with regards to the former Minister of Sports and the situation of lotteries. But I felt I needed to bring up another point of differentiation. The question is, did the minister have the authority under this act to approve a bank account for himself to direct expenses for projects in order to expedite the implementation of these projects? So I want to say this. I'm not going to get into the semantics as to whether the account was in his name or whether he had a bank account. That will be resolved. But the fact is, through his own admission and through the documents that we've seen, right, that he requested that 1/3 of the funds, which is $200,000 a month, be put aside, and that he be given the discretionary decision as to how that money was going to be spent. That's the worst. That's the best case scenario. It only gets worse from there if he in fact had an account and he did sign. But this is bad enough. And let me explain what I mean by that. The policy directions, which comes out of the act of the lottery. The minister may, after consultation with the chairperson, give to the board of directors the board directions of general character as to the policy to be followed in the performance of its functions in relation to matters appearing to the minister to concern the public interest. The minister may direct that the principle of equitable geographical distribution be observed by the authority in the application of its funds to youth and sports projects and programs. In accordance with the minister's directions, the board shall develop such specific policy guidelines as it may deem necessary and may circulate and disseminate such policies with the consent of the minister. Section 19 reads, funds of the authority. The funds are resources of the authority and shall consist of funds arising from the sale of the lease or disposition of property, such sums as may be placed at its disposal by the House of Assembly, funds arising from any sources consequential upon the performance of its functions, funds arising from any source, sums borrowed by the board for the purpose of meeting any of its obligations, and all other sums of property that may become payable or vested in the authority. All sums referred to in the subsection 1 shall be paid into and placed into the credit of one or more bank accounts approved by the minister. Now here's the legal interpretation. The minister has the authority under the Act to give general policy direction to the board of the National Lotteries Authority, even as far as approving accounts to be established. This, however, does not imply that the minister has the authority to get involved in the operations of the authority. You remember when we did the chartered accounting training? The fact that the minister has admitted that he approved an account in the name of the minister by himself to expedite projects raises many questions with respect to the separation and the duties between the policymaker and the executive. Such situations are ripe for abuse of authority and mass transparency. This is a situation that none of the ministers will find themselves in. This is a situation that none of my ministers will find themselves in. Ministers are policymakers, not responsible for operations. So when people ask, why did we do the chartered director training, was to make sure that not only do we understand that, but the chairpersons of boards and board directors and permanent secretaries and DPSs, all of us understand what is that line between policy and administration. And I have to say that his actions constitute a gross departure from what is provided by the National Lotteries Act. But you know, I believe the minister is a good person. But the person I hold more accountable for this was the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, who sat there and encouraged him to bring it up, and he should have left it alone. Because the fact is, brought up more questions than there are answers tonight. So, Madam Speaker, I want to be able to close tonight in saying the following thing. That for the Labour Party, everything is political. Everything is political. They're getting victimized, they're getting marginalized, all kinds of stuff. And let me use 3 examples. We heard them here tonight. The View Fort Administrative Building. It's because I hate Dr. Anthony, that I want to revenge on him, that I deprived the people of View Fort of this beautiful building complex. Really? He shouldn't flatter himself like that. It actually had absolutely nothing to do with him. To spend $77 million on an office complex, of which the debt servicing would have been $4 million a year. I'll put that in context. Do you believe that the government of St. Lucia today rents buildings in View Fort for the tune of $4 million? In fact, it doesn't even come close to $1 million. And I don't even want to go back in the last speeches, but I know that you know this. Our dedication and our commitment to e-government. So to say that you're building the building because the poor people in View Fort don't have any services and you want to build a building for them in order for them to have that. A building that you will have to pay to occupy. A building that you're going to have to pay to operate. So you're going to fill all that staff. So that means the recurrent expenditure for government is just going to go up. Far less the increase in the amount of money for debt financing. To generate no productivity. You want to help the people? That's what we're going to do. The minister talked about it. We're going to make sure that we become a paperless government. The ability to get your driver's license by the mail. Ability to be able to get your passport electronically. Be able to go to the lands and surveys and be able to get it online. We're going to be opening up service centers, government service centers, to be able to facilitate one-stop shops. You don't need to build a $77 million building. And the difference between our government is that the same place that he wanted to put that administrative building, we have gone out and found an investor from Trinidad who has an incredible business called Movie Town. So Movie Town is an IMAX theater, theaters, restaurants, shops, and an amusement park that he's going to build on that same place. And you know what the most beautiful part about that is? He's bringing his money to the table. He's going to pay the salaries of the people there, and he's going to operate it. It's not going to cost us anything. And the people from View Fort not only are going to get jobs, but they're also now not going to have to leave the south to come and see a movie in the north. And that applies from Soufriere all the way to Dennery.
Honorable Prime Minister, you now have 5 minutes within which to complete your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. National Trust. That I'm trying to victimize the National Trust? Why? Why would I try to? I've encouraged them. I believe in their advocacy. I think they should be a vibrant voice. I want to ask you a question. When you all approved the Dolphin Park, did you all go through? You did. It was in your cabinet conclusion.
Well, you were not there.
Was any attempt made to include the National Trust in that process? No, sir. So National Trust is lying. So the National Trust is saying, no, They're saying they didn't even know about it. Despite the fact that you announced it in your budget, they're out there publicly saying they didn't know anything about it. And in the meeting that I had, they said they didn't know. Because I was holding them accountable. I said, how can you come out and say you don't want this park when there was already a park approved by the former government? It doesn't matter. Did they approve, in the application to have the park at Anjabet, at Anjabet Canneries, were they included in the process? Did it have planning approval? The answer is no. It did not have anything. The cabinet conclusion said you approved it. Okay, and if you want me to, don't tempt me, because I'll bring all the letters as well. Okay. So now the National Trust submitted a project of which your cabinet approved to convert the museum at Pigeon Island into a conference facility. Capital expense. Okay. $6.5 million. Okay. So they're going to build a conference facility. And then they're going to take one of the old barracks and they're going to fix it up and they're going to put their office there. And that you gave them permission, the piece of land that was given to them downtown, opposite the Banana Growers Association building that they're using as a car park, you gave them permission to sell it. And that you then were going to guarantee the loan from NIC. Now, in the documentation I saw no feasibility study. And the first thing that comes to my mind is say, okay, a conference facility. You have Harbor Club opening up 3 conference facilities. Royalton has just opened up a massive set of conference facilities. Both Bay Gardens and Coco Palm are expanding their conference facilities. And now you have a government building opening up conference facilities. Okay? Everybody is opening up conference facilities. What do they believe that's so special that they're going to be able to handle the conference facilities? What? What revenue they're going to generate? And then you're going to turn around and you're going to put an office space in which you're not even going to pay rent. And that is $6.5 million. $6.5 million that you're going to put in. You know, it's okay. It's okay. All the other names, you know, fall silent on the whole thing. Okay? That's easy prey. But that's what the fact is, because those businesses already exist. It's not viable. So, the end of the day, the discussion I had with the National Trust is a simple one. Bring me the feasibility study, and I'll be happy to put the money in. But when I looked at the books of the National Trust is more than capable of taking care of itself. In fact, I was so heartened to hear the chairperson say that. She said, yes, it was a shock, well, but we knew it was coming because we did tell her. So she knew. Unlike what Tulsi was saying, she knew. And when she dropped it, she said, they can make up the difference. And that's what the point is. The point is, I'm going to ministries who are not generating cash, and I'm being tough on them. But I'm not to be tough on the National Trust. The National Trust has 2 roles. It's an advocacy group, and it manages parks. As an advocate, guess what? When the developers came to me and said they're going to have a difficult time in going to the canneries because of the location. And they came, I've always said it was canneries. Always said, nobody's never said it different. Never. They came and they said they went somewhere else. I said, fine, where do you want to go? They said they want to go to Pigeon Island. You know what I said to them? Go to the National Trust and apply. Which they did. I did not lobby anybody. My government did not go out and lobby for the project. Nothing. And the project, they went and made a presentation to the trust, and the membership of the trust cussed them off. And you know what's amazing? Is that cabinet has not even met to discuss the project yet. In fact, the only cabinet to have met to discuss the Dolphin Park is your cabinet. And you all approved it. We have not. It has not even come. And that's what I said to the National Trust. That what I expect to see is a report from them as to the pros and cons of having the park at Pigeon Island. And that once we have that, then that will be formed a part of the decision-making at Cabinet. We've asked the Tourist Board to do assessment in the marketplace. So Cabinet has made no decision, but yet I'm being accused of victimization. But you know what? Because that's the easy thing to do. That's because somebody's asking the tough questions. And then you now have NICE. So you have a program that you started that made it up to $20 million. Of which what? You said that you were going to give people... Sorry, Madam Speaker. 2 more minutes. You said you were going to give the people job training, job exposure for 1 year. That's why it was 1 year contract. But yet 85% of the people on NICE are on their 3rd year contract. But we're the bad people because we cut them. So what we did, we created NAPS. And what is NAPS about? NAPS is different in that we're now going to subsidize the salaries of people who are going to be working in call centers and in businesses in which after 1 year or a year and a half, that the business person takes over their entire salary. And we're only going to subsidize 1/3 of the salary. So the difference is that we're helping a young person get a job through an apprenticeship program in which that will become a full-time job, in which that person now will earn enough money to be able to borrow money and to build their own home. But no, you guys want to keep everybody on the string. A 1 year contract. You have to remain loyal to me in order to do that. And even if that's not the intention, that's what it looks like. And that's what we keep saying. That's what I said. That's your NICE program. So there are 3 examples in which I'm being accused of being a victim, of victimization, tyranny. I'm heartless. But in each occasion, we're finding solutions for the problem. So I want to say this to you. In conclusion, I want to reaffirm my government's commitment to ensure proper management of this economy. I also want to express sincere thanks to all who contribute to this debate and all the staff who made this possible, particularly you, Madam Speaker. I know the pain that you're in, and I want to say I appreciate your tolerance tonight, and I want to thank you all, and I look forward to the continuation of our debate.